Awesome.
Great.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate your time
No problem.
this
And
morning.
you're a friend of Sherali's?
Yeah, yes. Wait a second. How did you know this?
Guys, a little bird whispered in my ear. So
So Sherali as well as Richard Peddie.
oh, fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. I spoke. I met Sherali. Oh, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I think, and
Uh-huh.
yeah. So we've kept in touch. He came on my podcast, and then I reached out. I reached out to both of them before this and say, hey, any interesting stories you can share?
Okay, fire away.
Well, I'll get to them a little bit,
Sure.
a little bit later. But congrats on the book, first of all.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're. Why write a I guess we could call it a memoir. Would you call it a memoir?
Um, Not 100%,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, it's episodic. It's not
Yeah,
really,
that's right.
then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But and I think I wanted to talk as much about the change in our business
Yeah.
as I did about the change for me.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, there's part of it in there that's a memoir, but not completely.
Yeah. Why was now the right time to have this book
Oh,
out?
you know that's a you know that's a good question, because I'm not sure there is a perfect time.
Mm-hmm.
Although, I had been asked 4 or 5 times before to do it and refused,
Okay.
uh, because it was too much work.
Mm-hmm.
Writing's hard. Writing is different than the world that I live in,
Yeah.
which is much more verbal, much more tactile, and much more live.
Sure.
In the business that I'm in, whether it's radio or TV or podcasting, you do it once and it goes into the ether. Books don't go into the ether. So I'll be reminded of things I've said in this book for years to come.
Forever.
Yeah, yeah. So it just so happened that the timing was that I wasn't working as diligently and as long, at the time that the publisher approached me to say, would you consider doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it would take as long as it did. And then the pandemic hit. And so then I had a lot of time in my hand,
Okay.
to sit down and spend days and weeks and months on it. And in many ways, the podcast I do with Bob McCown and this book kept me focused during a time when a lot of people weren't focused.
Yeah.
So I stayed busy during the pandemic, and
Okay.
that was a really good thing. I had a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and or not just sit in front of the television all day. So that was the timing in the end was really, really good,
Yeah.
because I had time to write it.
The finished product, is this the stories? Are these the stories you knew you wanted to tell going in, or was there a different book going in than what we have today?
Yeah, Simon and Schuster do a really good job of saying, okay, if we're going to do this, if we're going to have this partnership,
Yeah.
um, let's start with where they think we should be and where I think we should be. So I did a brief outline of 20 chapters
Yeah.
that I thought were going to be interesting for readers, people who are TV nerds, hockey nerds, that would enjoy some stories.
Yeah.
And they probably pushed back only on 2 or 3.
Okay.
So from the beginning, the outline was pretty close to what was originally contemplated. The editor I worked with is a guy named Justin Stoller, outstanding in trying to make sure I stay focused on the stories that I'd promised to deliver.
Yeah.
And so that was really good for me. He made it very easy to have dialogue. And what he also did was he made sure that I didn't speak over people's head about the television industry or the hockey industry. So I would say something and he would say, well, you're going to have to explain that.
Too much inside baseball type
that would
thing.
push me back to the keyboard.
Okay.
And take a couple of more pages to explain how, television rights and the bidding process for rights, and a bit of the, the behind the scenes issues of the labor strife between the Players Association and the league. He was really very good about it.
Yeah. I've read a number of hockey books over the past years. Sammy Jo Small has written a book about her time with the women's national team.
Yeah.
Harnarayan Singh has written a book, and that was very insightful. To hear his perspective of what hockey meant to him and his family, and even Nick Kyprios. I was shocked at Nick Kyprios's book, because what I read in there, I go, this is like a different person that I'm used to seeing, on TV at that time, and now he's back in radio. And reading your book, I need to thank you for one of your chapters, or maybe it's stories that are in a couple of your chapters about Don Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a perspective of who I thought Don Cherry was, only based on, the 5 minutes he would ever show up on Coach's Corner every Saturday night. And obviously we know, the things that he had said that one year around Remembrance Day and Poppies, and I had a chance to talk to Harnarayan Singh about those comments. But reading your stories on who Don Cherry is to you, sort of the man that we don't see and we don't know, because all we know is 5 minutes a week. So I want to thank you, for that. And, I'm sure that other people that are fans of hockey reading your book would go, I never knew this about the man. Why was it important go ahead, sir.
Television is two-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's not three-dimensional like real people.
Mm-hmm.
And Don's a real person.
Yeah.
Don does have real feelings. He the bravado you used to see on Saturday nights, or you used to listen to on the radio show with Brian Williams.
That's right.
That was a bit of an act, because when you get in this business, you have to simplify and in order to try to communicate and entertain, and you end up starting to deliver to the viewer or the listener what the viewer and listener wants to hear too. So you play a role.
Yeah.
You're not a person, you play a role. And that's so, and for more than 30 years, it was a really good role for Don.
Yeah.
But there are upsides and downsides of those types of things too. Listen, Don Cherry is not racist.
Mm-hmm.
He's not. But I can see how people would be upset with things he said.
Yeah.
And I used to get upset with, things he said. But you talk about it, you get over it. It's easier when you can deal with the person one-on-one as opposed to on social media.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of what Don went through, and what the reason that I'm sure Rogers pushed back and said, no, here, if you don't apologize, we can't have you on the air anymore. So
yeah,
it's Don's at a good place in his life now too, and I'm actually happy for him, because I think he now understands there's more to life than 7 minutes on Saturday night. And because that was, for him, that was all consuming. But as a person, I still love sitting, having coffee with Don and talking about things not necessarily hockey, but about friends and about history and about life. And he's been very good to me. He's been very good to my family. And I think, Kareem, one of the things that if you read the book from beginning to end, loyalty is a very big part of my life.
Yes.
And loyalty is important. And there are times, not just in broadcasting, but there are times in life right now that we seem to have lost a little bit of that loyalty. And that's something that I felt when I did write the book, that I had to, not defend Don, but explain a little bit of what my friendship with Don is all about, and still is to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're honest as well in there. You say, you tell the stories of what Don has meant to you and your family. But then you also say, hey, maybe what he said shouldn't, the times are different today than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. And maybe you shouldn't have said that. So, I think even your honesty came out. You weren't sort of an apologist, so to speak.
No, it was so, and this is something that people laugh at me. We have, in our industry and in the world, we have become so polarized.
Yeah.
There's a black and a white. Well, you know what? There's only 5% black, and there's 5% white, and there's 90% gray.
There's middle,
And I choose, publicly, privately, to live in the 90% of gray.
Yeah.
When somebody has a really bombastic opinion, you can say, well, I can understand that, but have you contemplated this? There is another side to every story. And I think it's important for people to try to understand. I think I'm in the minority now, but I think it's important for people to try out to understand that there is, other factors that go into when the decision's made. And I really learned that more than anything, Kareem, when I worked at the National Hockey League.
Okay.
Because, from the outside, you can look at, what Gary Bettman does and what hockey teams do and say, well, that was stupid, or why did he do that? He doesn't like Canada.
He gets booed all the time. Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Yeah.
There are, and it really got home to me because, and this is, he actually told me this one day. He said, you've got to understand, every time you say something nice about the Toronto Maple Leafs, you got to say something nice about the Buffalo Sabres, because they're the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
They're the other team, and you do have to learn how to play it down the middle. And that has helped me, because in our business, there's a real void of that.
Yeah.
So that it's easy to go on radio or on TV or the podcast and say, well, have you, when somebody says something silly, I say, well, have you thought about this side? And that, that creates conversation, and hopefully it's entertaining.
Yeah. How is the podcasting life? How similar, how different is it to broadcasting?
Well, to me, and doing it with Bob, it is just like doing the old primetime show.
Yeah.
We don't rehearse. We don't research.
Okay.
We get on the call, 5 minutes before we start to record.
Yeah.
And we don't edit. If we make a mistake, we correct ourselves on the air and keep going.
Yeah.
There's not it is 100% content based. There's not a lot of production value.
Yeah.
In our show, it's 5 days a week. It's relentless, but the good thing is it's you start at 11 and you're done at noon, or whatever time we record.
Yeah.
And that's nice. Thinking ahead, trying to figure out what stories, people have a difficult time at times understanding that we're not journalists.
Sure.
We're not.
Yeah.
We're sports broadcasters. We're not going to have scoops. We're going to talk to people that have big stories at times, but our job more is to entertain more than it is to inform. And so we have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And we we have a pretty good chemistry, and that Bob is certainly one style of broadcaster, and I kind of fill a void with the other side of the broadcasting. So it's kind of fun.
Yes, similar to what we've just talked about with Don Cherry. People have told me, the same thing about Bob McCown. I've had Mary Ormsby. I've had the pleasure of having her
Yep.
On my podcast, and just I think I asked her, after we stopped recording, is Bob who he is on the radio? And she said the same thing. It was, that's Bob on the radio. That's a character, and he's one of the sweetest men that she knows. And I'm sure it's similar, in terms of the stories you tell about Don and Bob as well. But how I found it interesting that in I don't know if you were going back to Sportsnet or your first time at Sportsnet, you said you wanted a certain amount of days that you wanted to be on prime time.
Yeah.
Why was that important for you?
Because I love radio.
Okay.
I love radio.
Yeah.
Now,
does Bob have a say? Does Bob have a say that you're coming on his show, or?
Well, I was dealing with Nelson Millman at the time.
Okay.
Who was a good friend. And whether Nelson talked to Bob or not, I never really discussed that with either.
Okay. All right.
That when I was approached by the Sportsnet people to come on and do television,
yeah,
I understood the ins and outs of television better than most after 35 years, but I had never really been on television. Okay. I had to, believe it or not, Krim, I had to learn to take my own advice about how to manage my on-air look, my style. I had to learn to manage where my hands go, where my eyes go. I tend to have a conversation. My lips tend to move when I'm listening to the other person, so I have to watch that. I had to learn how to be on TV. I'm not sure I've learned yet, but I'm better. So I had to learn to take my own advice. So that was a challenge, but the comfort and I had to learn to do things to time.
Yeah.
On television, you might get 30 seconds to explain it. In radio, you might get 5 minutes. And I love long form.
Yeah.
I love sitting and shooting the shit. That's magic.
Yeah.
And because then you can go in 50 directions. And that's the other magic of the podcast is we start with one topic and end 50 miles away.
Yeah, there's that freedom
because something tweaks and you remember, and that whole concept on the show we do now is that Bob and I have 100 years of experience in broadcasting and sports between us.
Yeah, and
that really is a huge advantage for most people. And there are references you can make, not just about sports, but about broadcasting, because I think our show sometimes is about broadcasting too. So that perspective is different than radio and TV. And I wanted the comfort. I wanted the comfort of radio. I always had wanted when I went to university to get my broadcasting degree. When I applied for jobs across the country the first time around, I wanted a radio job. I didn't want to be in TV. Yeah. I wanted a radio job. I wanted the long form, be that conduit at 8 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the afternoon to be able to sit and tell you stories and why it was going to be fun to talk about sports that day.
Nice. I want to talk about Richard Peddie. I reached out to Richard Peddie. He shows up in your book, and I wanted to get some insights. And you talked about it in your book, the TV that you guys were doing, with what was it, with the Leafs TV, Raptors.
Well, we did two channels. We had a hockey channel, Leafs TV, and we had the basketball channel, which is now called NBA TV Canada, which at that time Raptors NBA TV.
Yeah. You guys were doing a lot, like the most TV production in Canada around sports.
Yes. At a certain point we were,
Yeah. And
it was crazy.
And so what's the is it true? And maybe I'm getting my channels mixed up, but is it true that or stories in fact that the work that you guys were doing was so important and maybe even threatening that Rogers and Bell had to take decisive action and purchase properties and stuff like. What's the story around all
Well,
of that?
Richard deserves a ton of credit for having the vision of getting into the broadcast business for Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment.
Yeah.
But he had no one on staff that could execute the plan, and that's how I got to join the company, was to basically take his vision and put it on the air.
Yeah.
Richard was at TSN and knew the broadcast landscape, but wasn't a producer, wasn't a content creator.
Yeah.
A great thinker, a great organizer, a very good businessman, but they needed someone to create the content. And it just so happened I had been let go by Hockey Night. And about 8 months later, maybe 6 months later, I got hired by Richard and the board to run the two channels, which was really exciting. So that's the basis of what the plan was. This was at a time when in Canada we were going from basic cable to digital cable.
Yeah.
And the government allowed, I think it was 40 channels, 40 brand new channels. I'm not sure many of them exist anymore, but 40 channels on the digital platform to create content. And so they applied for 2 licenses, got them. The basketball channel was easy because it was national and there was no other team in Canada because the Grizzlies had folded.
Yeah.
And so we could put our content from coast to coast, and we also had access to the content from NBA TV Canada, NBA TV in the United States. So that was an easy one to play and to put into process. The Leaf one was more difficult because you had to do it only in the Leaf region. And we had other than classic games, which we had to negotiate and buy from Molson Brewery, we had nothing. So we had to create all this content. We had to build a station out.
Yeah.
And we had to hire staff. We were close to 50 people at one point creating content a day. And I mean, somebody would say, well, you just, you create 4 hours of content and play it 6 times a day. Richard didn't believe that. I didn't believe that. And we created a really good small unit of people that were nimble, that were creative. And we started building content. And for a period of almost 5.5 years for me, it was so exciting because we were that little insect on the back of the elephant, because we didn't have very much money, but we had this great machine called the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
On the basketball side, the Raptors. We had good relationships with the NHL. And so we just started from scratch and said, what do you think will work? And that's where being creative and being open-minded with other people really made a difference for us. And it was at a time when the industry industry wasn't stagnant, but CBC was doing their thing their way. Sure. TSN was doing their thing their way. Sportsnet was in a good rhythm as well. So there was no chance for taking chances. And so we took a lot more chances because we could.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to cost us a lot of money to take chances. And a few things have still stuck. I still, you can watch a few of the networks now and still see some remnants of what Leafs TV did and were the first to do. Leafs Lunch was a Leafs TV invention. The game in an hour, which is now, whether it's Leafs or any team in the NHL or Raptors in 30, that was a Leafs TV invention. And there were things like that, running press conferences live constantly. Leafs TV did that before anybody else. And we did a lot of things. We did a lot of things first that now have become demanded and acceptable by the viewers and the listeners.
Yeah. It's like staple.
In
Yeah.
many markets.
Yeah. Like Jays in 30, Leafs in 30. It's like constantly.
Yeah.
Ours
was called Game in an Hour, and it was kind of our brand because you could do Leafs in an hour, Leafs game in an hour, Raptors game in an hour, so it became pretty easy for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard wanted me to let you know it, and you probably already know this. I think you talk about it in your book, but Bettman calls Richard Peddie and asks whether he should hire you, and Peddie says absolutely. So he just wanted to make sure that you knew that he put in a good word for you. I
did not know Richard at all. I had shaken his hand a couple of times when he was running the building when I was running Hockey Night. So I did not know Richard at all prior to us meeting before I was hired.
Okay.
And we are two totally different people. But there was a mutual respect, and there was the strengths that Richard had certainly were greater in those areas than mine. But then he was also very open to having other creative people around to say, let's try that. Or, hey, listen, once I give you the approval, you do what you need to do. And by the way, Richard taught me more about the business of sports, the pure numbers of sports, than anybody else I've ever worked for.
Wow. That's fantastic. John, listen, you got spunk, kid.
Yeah. So you did talk to a friend of mine, Sherali Najak, who went on to be the executive producer of Hockey Night and now runs the Olympic program for the CBC. He's one of the most talented broadcast executives we've ever had in our country, in any generation, at any time. And we have a great friendship. We have the respect I have for him as a person and as a creative genius in our country.
Wow.
Is beyond reproach. But we, again, another guy that I'm not like Sherali, and Sherali's not like me. And so we worked well together because I would allow him to do what he thought was necessary, and then he would tolerate what I thought was necessary. And one of our famous conversations on a regular basis was the character on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is the news director, Lou Grant.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little more direct than Sherali is and ever has been. My favorite line, and we used to laugh about it, is that when Mary Tyler Moore walked into his office and she said, "Mr. Grant, I love it here. I'm having so much fun." And Lou Grant turned to her and he said, "Mary, you've got spunk." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Grant. I hate spunk." I'm not necessarily Lou Grant.
Yeah.
But the enthusiasm is one thing, but let's get the job done and let's be efficient and let's move on to the next thing. So that's kind of where Sherali and I we met at a place in both of our lives that it worked out very well for both of us.
That is it. And to think you thought at one point in time he was your IT guy.
Well, yeah, he walked by my office. I just joined, gone to the CBC to run hockey, and I knew no one, and well, that's not true. I knew a few of the announcers, but I didn't know anybody in the office. And this is 1990, 93 or 94, 94, I guess. And the first thing they do is they set you up with your pass, and they set you up with you just take pictures, and then they give you your phone and they give you your laptop.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really think I'd had a laptop in my life at that point. And and then they're talking about the operating programs and they're talking about, how to log in for email, and they're talking about this. And this is really the rudimentary part of when laptops were just coming into being day-to-day use.
Yeah.
And so I'm nattering away at myself, and I'm typing, and nothing's happening. And this kid walks by, and I figured he was the IT guy. So I yelled at him, "Hey, kid, come on in here, kid. Can you help me with this?" And then that was in September of '94. We've been friends ever since.
That's amazing. John, our time is at the end, but if I need to ask you about one story that Sherali told me to ask you about, and this is Wayne Gretzky's last game. And you're in a hallway on intercom, but you're supposed to be somewhere else. You're supposed to be in a truck.
Well, so Sherali was our director, and Paul Graham, who now is the biggest executive at TSN in charge of live sports, is our producer. And Madison Square Garden is this big animal where your TV mobile is basically 5 floors below the ice surface. And so the game starts, and you're trying to watch television through what they give you in the TV mobile. And I was getting very frustrated because I didn't think we were telling the stories enough, because I didn't think we were seeing the stories.
Okay.
You can only, in television, you can only tell the stories what the cameras see. And this was a day where there were VIPs everywhere. There were people milling around. It was as much an event as it was a game that Sunday afternoon against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So at about halfway through the first period, I was just fit to be tied. And I was going to end up being a distraction in the truck. I knew they weren't going to be able to do their jobs properly if I hung around. So I left the truck and walked up the 5 floors to the ice surface, and we had an extra floor director's headset between the benches. And from that position, so I was literally stationed where announcers now do games, but I was on a floor director's headset, and I could see the whole bowl of the building. I could see people everywhere. I could see all the VIPs, and you could get a much better sense and feel for the game there, not to make decisions, because those were Paul's and Sherali's to make, but to just keep consistently giving them information.
Okay.
So here I was the executive producer, and for one of the first jobs I ever had at Hockey Night in the late 70s was to be a spotter and to, say, here's who's coming off the ice, here's going off on the ice. And here I am, April of 1999, 23 years later, doing the same job. And it was so satisfying because it worked.
Okay.
And the amount of people we got on the air, amount of pictures of the stories we told of Wayne's last game.
Yeah.
It was an electric day in so many ways. And I still remember, the things you remember. Wayne coming off the ice as he's to go to the room, and he turns and you can see, I've checked the video. You can see it on the screen. He turns and says, "Hey, John, how you doing?" as he's leaving the ice. And so you go, hey, that's, so you felt more part of it as well, which was kind of cool. Because I had been covering Wayne since he joined the NHL in 1979. We knew each other. So from that perspective, to be in the building at that moment was the right decision for the television show, for sure. But it was a great decision just to be there for a spectacular event.
And John, what you did was that the beginning of TSN and Sportsnet putting people at the ice level?
I don't think so. We had done it the year before at the Olympics in Nagano.
Okay.
Because we were in charge of host broadcaster for the first time NHLers went to the Winter Olympics.
Okay.
And we had worked with CBS to put Darren Pang between the benches. And so Darren really was the first guy to be that third person in the booth, or it was at times second person on the broadcast, between the benches.
Okay.
He was, and it was on a network in the United States that we didn't have a deal with. It was on CBS that year.
Wow, that's fantastic. John, thank you so much for spending time with me. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed hearing your voice on the radio and now on the podcast. And so thanks for all the stories that I heard your voice on. On behalf of Canadians who love hockey, thanks for creating the stories that we've seen over the years on TV.
Hey, there's no need to thank me, because this is fun. I've had fun for a long period of time. The highs are high. Make no mistake about it. The highs are high, and riding the roller coaster like I've done, every once in a while to get knocked down and then to fight back, to get back on the high, that might be as much fun as anything that I've ever done. Because every time, I'm one of those guys that people say I have 9 lives. I think I'm in double digits now. So.
Well, you keep on bouncing back. The book is Evolve or Die: Hard-Won Lessons from a Hockey Life. The author and my guest has been John Shannon. Pick up this book wherever books are sold. Indigo, Chapters. Go into your local bookstore and ask for it.
Yeah, everybody in Windsor, go to Richard's bookstore. We'll give Richard a plug. Go to Richard's bookstore in Essex and buy the book. Or our friends at Amazon have been very good as well. Nice.
Has Richard asked you to come into the store and do a book signing and a book reading?
No, he hasn't.
Who's your agent, John? You need to.
So there's a lot of people say I don't need an agent. Some people say I do it pretty well myself. So.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.